All right, stay right there. Stay right there. I want you all to look over to your right. That man has been here 25 years. And I asked him if he would come and teach sometime and tell us how he is always so happy. And we're going to pick a date. You know that as you've probably heard in other places, first impressions mean everything. And the first impressions that people get of St. Paul's are of Joseph and Daryl. When they come across the street, when they park their car and they come, or they come into one of the buildings, they encounter Joseph and Daryl. And they're always so pleasant and so gracious, and they've been here for a long time, and I'm really grateful for them. So, I'm glad you're here. Okay. No matter who you are or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. So, we begin this class every Sunday in silence, and a lot of today is going to be about silence and meditation. So, if it helps, take a deep breath and close your eyes. You don't have to do that, but our silence reflects our intention to be aware that we are right now in the heart of sacred mystery, and that this sacred mystery seeks to find expression through who we are and how we live. Grace be in our heads and in our thinking. Grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. Grace be in our ears and in our hearing. Grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. Grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. Grace be at our ends and at our departing. And may we have the eyes to see and the courage to walk the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Amen. So I'm calling this time today praying to the God who is not elsewhere. So let's start here. You and I are immersed in a sea of beliefs and assumptions, most of which, even if we are aware of them, we don't take them seriously, or we don't see how they affect the living of our lives. I think I could easily spend the rest of our time today talking about what these assumptions and beliefs are, and when the time allotted for today's class was over, I would have just begun. They are so many. One of the operating beliefs in our culture is that a person's worth and identity is to be found in what they do. So if we meet someone new, or if someone new meets us, one of the first questions asked is, what do you do? Now, I know it's a social convention or habit to ask this question, but one of the assumptions is that this is true for everybody everywhere, and it's not. This is something that is unique to North America, particularly the United States. Other cultures don't ask this question like we do. Sometimes I want to respond when somebody asks me this is, why is that important to you? Or what are you going to do with that information once I give it to you? A person who was a very important teacher of mine once said that if you are asked this question by someone that you want to have a relationship with, do not answer that question in a way that causes them to close the door of their mind to who you are and put you in a box. So in this culture, I would never say, if somebody asks me, what do you do, that I'm a pastor or minister or clergyman or something like that, because so many assumptions are made about religion and religious institution that the door would slam, or they would make assumptions about me that simply are not true. I would never tell someone that, I'm a psychologist, because then you get this. Well, I have a friend who is. So my friend said that if you're asked that question, what you want to do is answer it in such a way that a person says, really, tell me more. Or I'm interested in that, or I could use some of that, or whatever. So when I'm asked the question, what do you do? My general answer is, about what? That's why I don't have many friends. I have started asking, you've had this experience. You're checking out the grocery store or someplace, the clerk is checking you out, and they say, did you find everything okay? And I have started saying, well, I guess, are you hiding things? Is this a treasure hunt? I am that. So if a person in this culture wants to know the answer to the question and they ask me, what do you do for money? If that's the question that they're asking, I usually respond by saying, I am a trans-religious spiritual teacher. And I do this teaching individually and in groups. I do it once a week. I think you would find it interesting. Can I give you directions and will you come next week? Now, I want you to adopt that. So that if somebody asks you what ordinary life is about, you can say, ordinary life is about trans-religious spiritual teachings that I'm finding helpful in my daily life and living, and I'd like to invite you to come with me next week. Now, I use the word trans-religious because religious institutions are almost always dualistic in nature. Now, that's not a criticism, it's just a fact. And further, in our culture, as well as in many cultures, religious institutions are mostly culturally irrelevant and not prophetic. That's not a criticism, it's a fact. Or they are in this culture becoming really dangerous. Now, institutions are an important foundation for any society. We have to have them. Institutions not only for religion, but education, medicine, financial institutions, others. But because institutions are composed of people like us, they can lose their way, they can ignore, or they become unconscious about their reason for being. And this is one of the reasons that it's important to have prophetic voices on the inside of institutions. John Dominic Crossan, whose work I'm going to be referring to many, many times in the weeks ahead, says that the human animal is wired for religion. Now, by religion, he doesn't mean church necessarily, but religion is what is our organizing principle in life, whatever that is for you. For many people in this culture, it's work, or money or success or image. But Crossan says that the human animal is wired for religion just like we're wired for language. If you want to navigate American culture at any level, the English language is essential. Now, as you likely remember, I have chosen to be guided in the construction of these teachings by following the Jesus narrative in this book by Stephen Mitchell, The Gospel of Jesus. And we got to a set of teachings known as the Sermon on the Mount. And we got through the first part of that in pretty good order. The Beatitudes, we said, are the essence of the teaching of Jesus. And the Beatitudes, as you well remember, can be summed up in 3 words. And those words are humility, justice, and peace. Okay. You need to know that. So we dealt with, in talking about these things, how we are to be the light of the world. We are to be custodians of consciousness. We are to be the salt of the earth. And then I also added to that we are to have some awareness of what it means to grow, various models of growth. And we offered another model of cognitive growth in that, because our wisdom is shaped by our moral and spiritual maturity. And I would add to that intellectual maturity as well, cognitive maturity, how much we know. This is critically important in our culture because right now our government is being run by a bunch of adolescents who are involved in a major cafeteria food fight. And then we reached a teaching that is likely the most familiar of all of Jesus' teachings. And that is the set of verses that make up what we call the Lord's Prayer. And so in doing an introductory teaching to that, I have gotten a number of very specific questions, some from you, many from people who watch online. And a couple of the questions that we got led to the teaching that you heard last week, which had a lot to do with, okay, what's the practical application of this? What are we to do? You say that we're to speak out. How are we to do that? And so Holly and I spent last week mostly talking about that, and Holly brought a ton of really good information about what to do. And unfortunately, we had technical difficulties, so that didn't get recorded. However, you can go on the Ordinary Life website and see the presentation slides, and you can copy down some of what she said about things to do, places to go, that sort of thing that will be useful. So there is a person who attends this class online who sent me an email that I'm going to read part of to you. This person said, I am new to Ordinary Life. The way you joke about having a daily spiritual practice must mean that you have referred to it a lot in the past. I can imagine somebody, if you are here for the first time, or if you're just watching this for the first time and you hear daily spiritual practice, you're hearing something for the first time that people who have been coming for weeks and weeks and weeks are sick and tired of hearing. So the person went on to say, maybe everyone else knows what you're talking about, but I don't have a clue. So there is a person who attends this class who is not here today, I see, who is taking additional training from Suzanne Stabile about the Enneagram. You remember when she was here as one of our endowment speakers. And this person said to me last week, She stresses having a daily spiritual practice more than you do. And though I have implied that most anything can be a daily spiritual practice, I want to be very clear that I think there are some things that are essential to having a daily spiritual practice. Now, you would not expect to go live in another country without learning the language of that country. And you would not expect learning the language of that country would be something that you could learn in 3 easy lessons or do for 3 minutes a day. The term spiritual practice is one that comes from Eastern religions. So when I started studying with Jack Kornfield, and this was likely 50 years ago. I'm really old. You got to keep that in mind. Kornfield's one of the first people who introduced Buddhism into America. Okay, so he's a wonderful teacher, very mild. He's also a clinical psychologist. And he said that if you started taking piano lessons today, and you practice 30 minutes a day, that maybe in 3 or 4 weeks you might be able to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. You wouldn't do it a couple of days and think you could do that. But a lot of people do spiritual practice a couple of days and think, well, I'm no good at this, and they quit. Perhaps the oldest and the most researched meditation practice is one that goes by the name of Vipassana. And that will be in the notes, and you can look it up. I'm going to suggest you do. It's the meditation form that Jack Kornfield taught. And Vipassana is a Sanskrit word that means to see what is. And it was out of my initial training with Kornfield that I came up with my own personal definition of what a spiritual practice is. And what I said is that the heart and content of spiritual practice is developing the capacity to be with what is and to grow in the ability to be with what is in a non-judgmental way. So whatever else you might do for a spiritual practice, in my opinion, and that's what you're getting here, it's just my opinion, it must include meditation. 15 minutes a day. When I first did the Vipassana training that required 17 hours a day for 10 days, the suggestion after that was that we commit to sit for an hour a day. Okay. And I know what you're thinking. I don't have time for this. So you can go online and search Vipassana meditation, and you will find that there's a wealth of resources out there. There's even a Vipassana meditation you can get for your phone, an app. There's even a Vipassana meditation app for the School of Vipassana Meditation that I went to for the 10-day. Now, when I did this, there was no such thing as a smartphone. We didn't have mobile phones at that time. But I will tell you with utmost confidence, and I really want you to hear what I'm saying, that getting an app about meditation, watching a YouTube video, reading a book about meditation, hearing me talk about meditation is not the same as meditating. And meditating is a difficult and humiliating experience. It's hard to find time to sit 15 to 45 minutes a day. And it's as difficult as learning a language or learning to play the piano. I've been working about 3 weeks to learn a new card trick. It's difficult to pull it off without somebody catching what you're doing. And meditating is humiliating at the beginning because you realize how you stink at it. And you realize how very infrequently we are actually present. We're always somewhere else. In the future, back there. Well, I'll sit for 15 minutes, but I don't want to waste this time. At least I can plan my menu. Just being with the breath, being with the moment, and then not getting judgmental when it goes off and you need to bring it back. Right? So Cornfield said it's like training a dog to paper, a puppy to paper. When the puppy runs off, you don't beat the puppy, you just gently bring it back to that. It was about the third or fourth day of the sitting meditation and 10-day, and I remembered what Cornfield had said about that. And I was sitting and thinking, watching my mind do all this crazy stuff, and I thought, oh my goodness, my dogma just ran over my karma, or my karma just ran over my dogma. It was just an awful experience about that. It isn't about being religious. It isn't about believing something. It's about gaining insight. Indeed, that's the name of the movement. So if you go on your smartphone, not now, please, but sometime later, and look up the words insight meditation, you will have a wealth of information. There are places here in Houston that you can go to be trained in insight meditation. So a spiritual practice begins with meditating. And though it has all the difficulties I've mentioned, it is the best way to experience what I mean by non-duality or non-dual mind, which you must have if you're going to pray. Now, it's not the only way to get to non-duality. There are other ways. You can have a doctor say you've got 6 weeks or 6 months. You can lose a child or a partner or a parent. You can lose a job that you depended on. All sorts of ways. But that's no guarantee. Because some people experience those things and they just become embittered or they stop living. But great suffering can also lead, after it gets you into the dark night of the soul, it can also lead you to other things. Now, the good news of having a meditation practice is that it will transform your life. Not immediately. You don't learn a language, in spite of what Babbel and Duolingo say, in 3 minutes a day. It takes time. But it comes. And the reason it's called a spiritual practice is so that we can take the practice into the rest of our lives, into the rest of our living. So I have, since not only since starting teaching about God not being out there, but this particular series, I have gotten more questions on prayer than I have gotten about any other single topic. And for those of you watching or those of you here, those sent emails, I do my best to answer them. I can't answer them all in this one class, but we're going to do some of them and try to get to that. Just want to be clear, you cannot pray from a dualistic mind. And we're going to be talking about prayer and the Lord's Prayer in the weeks ahead. Now, meditation is different than contemplation. And so some form of contemplation is also essential for a daily spiritual practice. Now, the slide that I have put up, I don't know where I got this, and you can't read it from where you are, but it will be on the website so you can print it out and you can look at it. It's called the Tree of Contemplative Practices. And I think there are over 33 different contemplative practices listed on this thing. All the way from reading, centering prayer, social protest groups, all sorts of things are on there. So you pick one and you do it. So you involve meditation and contemplative practice. Walking is a contemplative practice. Our focus going forward for the next number of weeks, it's going to be on just one of these. It's going to be on prayer. And centering prayer is one of the things that's listed on here. Back in the 1970s, as a result of what was happening in the 1960s, when Eastern religions started making their move into American culture, there were 3 Trappist monks. Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk. There were 3 Trappist monks who thought, wow, surely the Christian religion must have something to offer in terms of meditation practice and contemplative practice. So they went looking. And what they popularized for people who were interested in this from a Christian perspective, they brought to popularity works like John of the Cross, whoever wrote The Cloud of Unknowing, Teresa of Avila, and then Meister Eckhart. Those started becoming popular, and people started translating their works and the works of Kabir and the works of other Persian poets and things because they got what non-duality was like. Jim Finley has been a master teacher for me about this, and I have cherished my times with him. And if you want to do this, this is not in written form, but this is an audio program that you can get from the Center for Action and Contemplation. It will set you back $50. But this is Jim Finley and Richard Rohr and Cynthia Bourgeot teaching about what it means to follow the mystics through the narrow gates. You might remember Jesus teaching that if you want to follow me, straight is the way and narrow is the gate. So they teach about this in this program. I highly recommend it. I don't recommend trying to read Meister Eckhart, John of the Cross, and The Cloud of Unknowing out of the gate. It's too hard. You need somebody, I need somebody, maybe you don't, maybe you're a lot smarter than me, but I needed somebody to interpret this material for me, and Finley was great at that, and also in teaching people how to read these particular documents. And we are so blessed now that you can go on YouTube and you can watch Finley and Rohr, watch about insight meditation on YouTube for free, and you can learn about it. And that can be part of your spiritual practice, getting that cognitive information in about what's doing. So I just want to be clear again that hearing this, reading a book about it, doing all this is not a spiritual practice. You have to meditate. And then you have to have a contemplative practice. Reading a book about swimming is not the same as, you got the point. So, and I also want to be clear. I sound like I know what I'm talking about. And I do for me. But that may not be true for you. So, as George, my spiritual teacher, said, I cannot tell you what to do to be. I can tell you what people who are busy being do, but there's no guarantee that if you do those things, you will be. Got it? He went on to say something to me that it took me decades to apprehend. In some other conversation, he said, you know, not drinking is not the same as being sober. Think about it. So, at any rate, for me, what having a daily spiritual practice means for me is the first thing I do in the morning is I write down my dreams. I keep a gratitude log. I meditate, and then I contemplate. My contemplation usually involves some reading, trying to make notes about what I'm reading, see how that applies to my life. I have just about finished reading the third book of Sufi theology. Sufism is the mystical dimension of Islam. This is not my notes, but I just want to say it is a disgrace that our government, particularly Texas government, is going after Muslims. The Islamic religion is one of the most beautiful religions. Now, you can find things about any religion to criticize. Look at the Christian Crusades, okay? We don't have a good history about a lot of things. Blowing up abortion clinics and all sorts of things can be put at the Christian the doorsteps. But Islam, particularly Sufism, is a religion that primarily is based on kindness and respect, which is mostly lacking at high levels in our government, right? That's not my notes. I just ranted. Sorry. So let's talk about the Lord's Prayer. So in the time left today, I'm going to talk about the Lord's prayer, and then some more about the Lord's Prayer. There's not a person in this room who doesn't know the Lord's Prayer. It's said all the time. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, glory, and honor. And we can do it like that, and with about that much effectiveness and meaning. I want to tell you how Crossan opens this book, which we'll be referring to. I'm paraphrasing and quoting at the same time. The Lord's Prayer is Christianity's greatest prayer. It is also Christianity's strangest prayer. It's prayed by all Christians, but it never mentions Christ. It is prayed in all churches, but it never mentions church. It's prayed on all Sundays, but never mentions Sunday. It's called the Lord's Prayer, but it never mentions Lord. It's prayed by fundamentalist Christians, but it never mentions the inspired inerrancy of the Bible, the virgin birth, the miracles, the atoning death, or the bodily resurrection of Christ. It's prayed by evangelical Christians, but it never mentions the gospel. It's prayed by Pentecostal Christians, but it never mentions the Holy Spirit. It's prayed by Congregational, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, and Roman Catholic Christians, but it never mentions congregation, priest, bishop, or pope. It never mentions a single one of the doctrines that divides Christians today. It never mentions heaven or hell. He says the Lord's Prayer is a prayer from the heart of Judaism on the lips of Christianity for the conscience of the world. I'm going to read that again. The Lord's Prayer is a prayer from the heart of Judaism on the lips of Christianity for the conscience of the world. It is a radical manifesto and a hymn of hope for all of humanity in a language addressed to all the earth. So Crossan contends that the prayer is both revolutionary and hopeful because it proclaims at its heart a vision of justice that is at the core of the Jewish biblical tradition and is at the core of Jesus' teaching, which was humility, justice, and peace. And it's hopeful in that it speaks of a well-run household that is governed by distributive justice. Now we get into that next week. So Crossan uses the metaphor of electricity to talk about both prayer and God. We need electricity to charge our phones, right? Sometimes it's hard to find, like you're in an airport or someplace. But it's always available, even though we have to search it out. And when we do find it, it's up to us to decide if and when to plug into it. Prayer is that. So the word prayer goes back to a Sanskrit word that means to ask. Not ask in the way that we think about asking, but it's the asking that says, I beg you to give me your attention. I plead for you I pray you, give me your attention. So I want to begin with this one foundation, meaning, definition, understanding of prayer. Prayer is a plea for a union with God. That's what it's asking for. That we can be connected to that source of energy, which is our identity. Now, we're going to have to thread a needle going forward because Jesus, as far as we know, never told his disciples to pray. Now, we have some evidence that they put some words in his mouth about that, but we'll get to that. As far as we know, the only question that they ever asked Jesus was, would you teach us how to pray? And evidently, again, this is supposition, they asked this because they saw that his daily spiritual practice was at the root of his having the power and authority to affect people's lives in the way that he did. And they wanted some of that. Jesus was a Jew in the prophetic tradition. And that tradition, the Jewish tradition, strongly insisted that God does not want prayer, ritual, worship, and sacrifice. Rather, what the Jewish tradition says God wants is distributive justice so that all of God's people, especially the most vulnerable members, get a fair share of God's world. Now, this gets riskier because this prophetic tradition asserts that since God is a God of justice, one cannot pray to God out of a state of injustice. At least not without insincerity and hypocrisy. So prayer and justice are what we call two sides of one coin. You can distinguish heads from tails, but you cannot separate them. So prayer and justice always go together. Now that makes praying risky, doesn't it? To pray to such a God who demands humility, justice, and peace is to risk being empowered for humility, justice, and peace. Now, this leads me to conclude, because of improper or inadequate religious literacy education, that most people know what to pray for, but not how to pray. So most of our prayers are, gimme, or would you, or I need, or I want. Right. So John Dominic Crossan says that based on his study of the prophetic tradition, and that found in the Hebrew Psalms, a way to think about prayer is that we pray to the God of justice, to be empowered by that God for justice. Now, if you promise that you will try to keep in mind that when I use the word God, I'm not speaking of some being out there somewhere. I want to try to relate this understanding of prayer to that word, God. If you remember, I'm calling today's teaching, Praying to the God who is not elsewhere. God's here. God is both with us and utterly beyond us, as well as ahead of us. God, an evolutionary understanding of God would lead us to say that God is creativity, and the driving force of this creativity is love. A combination of every kind of love we know and loves we cannot know. A God of colossal wisdom and inventiveness. Karl Rahner, the theologian, not the comedian. They don't spell the last name the same anyway, but he said that prayer was speaking into this understanding of God, and thus prayer is speaking into the silence. So I want to repeat something I said last week, which is something I got from William Cleary. I got the idea from him. These are my words, but his idea. Verbal prayer makes sense if we keep in mind that talking to God is like talking to your dog. You say human words, but your dog pretty much ignores what you say for how you smell. So if we smell of kindness and compassion and justice and humility, that makes a difference, right? So I had completed writing today's text when Tom Driscoll, who watches online, sent me this poem by Tukaram, who is a Hindu saint from the 16th century. This is just, thank you, Tom, for this. I could not lie anymore, so I started to call my dog God. First, he looked confused. Then he started smiling. Then he even danced. I kept at it. Now he doesn't even bite. I'm wondering if this might work for people. Isn't that beautiful? Hindu tradition, non-dual. Not Western tradition. So prayer is this understanding. It's never a request about something. It's an attempt. It's not an attempt to affect reality in some way, like heal a sickness, stop ice, or to stop it raining or start raining. So here's another definition of prayer. Prayer is sitting self-consciously in the presence of God until that presence is part of who you are. Now, I want to insert a word here about words. Or I want to say something about saying something. From the beginning of when human beings became human beings, and what makes us human beings is being conscious, which is apparent, which makes it apparent that many people walking about appearing as human beings aren't human beings because they're not conscious. All right, does that make sense? But since that beginning of time when we became Homo sapiens, the way that we have communicated things from one person to another has involved teaching and language. Whether you're starting about people who discovered and learned how to make fire, to create fire, to warm and heat and cook things, or whether you're talking about how to do open heart surgery or fly an airplane, it's always involved a teacher and language. Teacher and language, indispensable, right? Right now, I am speaking English. It's a very rich language, and it draws from many streams. Anglo-Saxon, Germanic, Latin, more recently from all the other languages of the world, and then gibberish languages like 6, 7. However, English language has never been the language of revelation. The languages that have had the most profound spiritual vocabularies have been Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, Aramaic, Hebrew, and to some extent Greek. But those first 5 are the languages of revelation. There are key words in these languages that have durability and depth and meaning that cannot be spoken in the English language. So that when somebody is trying to teach about prayer or about any of these other words, humility, justice, peace, whatever, we have to stop and define what the word means. But in those other languages, which I call picture word languages, you don't have to do that. And I learned this in seminary when I was required to learn Hebrew, which after you learn the vocabulary is really an easy language to learn. The vocabulary is not huge, but the Hebrew language is a picture word language. I'll give you an example. The word wait, W-A-I-T, appears in Hebrew, translated into English, many different times in the Hebrew scriptures. But the word wait in Hebrew is usually a different word every time. One word for wait in the Hebrew language is the picture word that is a rope that has been twisted taut almost to the breaking point. Wait. And that is in the Psalm when it says, "My soul waits for the Lord, more than they that watch for the morning." It's like standing on tiptoe, that kind of waiting. But we don't get that because we are limited to English. So there's another word in the Psalms that says, "Wait on the Lord." And that word, wait, is a picture word that is like a sheep lying in a pasture of green grass. Wait. Passive, relaxed, confident, receptive. But in English, it's the same word. So if they don't mean the same things. So in 1990, I bought this book by Neil Douglas Klotz. I think I was inspired to do it after working with Cornfield, but I'm not sure. I went on Amazon and saw that you can acquire the hardback version of this book for $305.89. Pricing is weird, isn't it? Or you can get a paperback copy for $13. So Neil Douglas Klotz was doing his work long before Stephen Mitchell. He was doing his work long before people of the Jesus Seminar. And on the cover of this book, which you can't read, Matthew Fox writes, "Reader, beware. Though this book is brief, it contains seeds of a revolution." So if doing cognitive work is part of your contemplative daily practice, I would recommend this. And I want to read to you Neil Douglas Klotz's translation from the Aramaic of the Lord's Prayer. It's a lot longer than our version because he's trying to take these picture words and translate them into a usable English version, okay? Some of you will copy this down from the notes that come out Tuesday website, and you might use this in your daily spiritual practice. This is the Lord's Prayer. O cosmic birther of all radiation and vibration, soften the ground of our being and carve out a space within us where your presence can abide. Fill us with your creativity so that we may be empowered to bear the fruit of your vision. Let each of our actions bear fruit in accordance with your desire. Endow us with the wisdom to produce and share what each being needs to grow and flourish. Untie the tangled threads of destiny that bind us as we release others from the entanglement of past mistakes. Do not let us be seduced by that which would divert us from our true purpose, but illuminate the opportunities of the present moment. For you are the ground and the fruitful vision, the birth power and fulfillment, as all is gathered and made whole once again. Now, folks, that's prayer. And that's praying. Now, you have to keep in mind that the people who wrote about Jesus and Jesus himself, they did not live in or have an awareness of the cosmology that we have. You have to take that into consideration. Also take into consideration that in the Jewish tradition, prayer is a communal event. It's never individual. I don't say you can't pray individually. I'm just saying that in the Jewish tradition, prayer was something that was done, though privately, communally. Or, as one of my teachers said, and I've used this line before, this solitary work we cannot do alone. We do it in community. I conclude my daily spiritual practice every day with a prayer known as the prayer of St. Francis. Now, St. Francis did not write this prayer. There's no evidence of it in any of his writings. Indeed, it didn't appear until 700 years after Francis was dead. But it's called the St. Francis prayer, and I encourage you to memorize it. It's not difficult. And you know, there is something to be said for learning something by heart, right? By your heart, you learn something. So the prayer is easy to do. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, let me sow healing. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, life. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in self-forgetting that we are found, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. May we so pray. And may we so live that prayer and living are joined as one. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo, so watch your step, and see you here next week. Thank you.